Okay, so we're talking about the properties of real numbers, and the question we're trying to answer is what are the properties of the real numbers, okay? When we talk about these properties, we're going to talk about them in terms of addition and multiplication. And the reason is that we focus on those is technically addition and subtraction are opposites. And so when we talk about addition, we are talking about subtraction because they are opposites, okay? Just like multiplication and division are opposites. Okay? So these are opposites. And so we don't have to talk about 4 different operations and the properties. We can just talk about 2. And that simplifies it for us a little bit. Okay? So we're talking about addition and multiplication. The first 4 properties we're talking about are the identities and the inverses. Okay? Identity, the reason it's called an identity is it returns the same number. Okay, so the additive identity equals 0. The reason it equals 0 is because any number x plus 0 will always equal x. You get the same number back. Okay? The multiplicative identity is 1. Reason being, any number x times 1 will always equal the same number x. So these 2 identities, they're called identities because they return the product or the sum is the original number. Okay, so that's the identities. Now the inverses are the opposites, essentially. The additive inverse equals negative x. Okay, here's one. X plus negative x is going to equal 0. Okay, x plus negative x equals 0. For the multiplicative inverse, that equals 1 over x. The reciprocal. The reciprocal of x. So it's the reciprocal of whatever number you're talking about. The reason is if we take that x, multiply it by 1 over x, it is going to equal, it is going to equal 1. The inverses will always return the identity. So the inverse takes you back to the identity. Okay? An important thing to note about those inverses, 0 does not have a multiplicative inverse. That should make sense. The reason that should make sense is because we can't take the reciprocal of 0. The reciprocal of 0, 1 over 0, that's bad news bears. We don't want that. Okay, so we do not have a multiplicative inverse for 0. Okay, so let's take a second and you try these. I want you to find the additive inverse and the multiplicative inverse for each one of these numbers here. So just a quick example for 4, the additive inverse, that's negative of the number, right? It's the opposite. The multiplicative inverse, that would be the reciprocal, that is 1/4. Okay, so pause for a second, and now you try. Okay, check your work. The first one we covered, -4 and 1/4. That second one, that -3, when we make that negative, when we take the opposite, negative of -3 becomes a +3. Okay, the multiplicative inverse keeps that negative and then takes the reciprocal, so 1/3, 1 over 3. Okay? And then 1/2, the additive inverse is -1/2. And the multiplicative inverse, the reciprocal, is 2 over 1, which equals 2. Okay? Both of those answers are awesome. Those are the inverses, additive, and multiplicative. A couple other properties we need to talk about. The first one is the closure property. So it's a little bit more detailed. But what it means is that adding or multiplying, right? Those were the two operations we were working with. Adding or multiplying two real numbers gives back a real number. So adding and multiplying two real numbers equals another real number. Quick example for you. 7 plus 1.5 equals 8.5. Real plus real equals real. Okay? 7 times 1.5 equals 10.5. Real number times real number equals real number. Okay? When this happens, or when we see the closure property, or the way we talk about the closure property, is that it is closed. The real numbers are closed under addition or multiplication. Okay? The real numbers are closed under addition or multiplication. Okay? Commutative property. You can add or multiply in any order. It's like driving to school. You can you're commuting. You go that way forward or to school, and then you go that way home from school, and you get to the same place. Okay? So this is what this one looks like. Look at a couple examples here. 3 plus 4 equals 7. But also 4 plus 3 equals 7. Okay. 3 times 4 equals 12. 4 times 3 also equals 12. You can do it either order, you will get the same answer. You have to be careful with negatives. Okay? Negative 3 plus 4 is negative 1. Excuse me, not negative 1, positive 1. When you want to commute that, you have to make sure you take the negative with you. 4 plus negative 3 also equals 1. Okay, so be careful with the negatives, that negative is attached to the number and that you're truly treating it as addition or multiplication. Okay? Associative, association, who you hang out with. Okay? We can group operations and it won't change the result. So the way we group our operations when they are addition or multiplication, the grouping of operations does not impact the answer, does not change the answer. Okay? So here we're talking about different groups of numbers. For example, if we take 5 plus 3, we get 8. If we add 7 onto that, we get 15. Okay? If we take 5 and add it to 3 plus 7, which is 10, we still get 15. Okay? 5 times 3 times 7 is 105. I hope. It's 105. Good. Okay? 5 times 3 times 7, which is 21, is still 105. Even though we're grouping it, even though we're shifting those parentheses, we don't change the result. The last one that you all know and love is the distributive property. Okay, we can distribute numbers. The distributive property actually kind of unites or joins together addition and multiplication. Okay? So the distributive property is these two combined, because what you're doing is you're multiplying into an addition problem. Okay? So let's try and identify a couple properties. Okay, 3 example problems that I want you to give a quick try to. I'll talk you through the first one, and then you will pause, and you'll try the next 2 on your own. Okay, in this first one, it's hard because we normally look left to right. It's just how we do things. It's how we read. Okay, but here, we need to start on the right side and work back to the left. Let's look at what we have going on here. We see a 4 on the outside of the parentheses, and then we see the product happening on the left side. 4 times 5 is 20. So 4 times 5a is 20a. This first one, that is a strange version of the distributive property. When you factor, you are using the distributive property. Okay? You try the next two. Okay, check your work. Number 2 should have been the commutative property. You are changing the order. AB became BA. You switched their order. That is commutative. We said order does not matter. Changing the order does not change the answer. Okay, the third one, we are adding 0. Right? That adding of 0. 0 is the additive identity. Now, you may have seen parentheses and thought, oh, associative. But if it were associative, now you don't need to write this down or anything, but just a thought, if it were associative, this is what it would have looked like. You would have had a plus 0 plus b, right? These two are a group. A plus 0 are a group. Associative says you change the group that it's hanging out with. It's now a plus, and then the group has changed. 0 and b are now hanging out. Okay? Associative's not wrong, but it's not quite right. We want to think about this as the additive identity. Okay? 8 properties that we talked about. The 2 identities, additive and multiplicative. The 2 inverses, additive and multiplicative. Right? There's 4. That's half of them. Then closure, commutative, associative, and distributive. Okay, they're not tough. We need to get the hang of identifying them, kind of. The bigger thing is working with them and recognizing that order doesn't matter. It'll make things a little bit easier for you as you work through different problems. If you can play with these properties to get them to do what you want. Okay, so hopefully you can master these 8 real number properties.